There's been so much shifting sands in the world of hot hatches when you think about it. Take these two. Over the years, the Hooligan Type R has become softer and more forgiving and roomier. I mean, Jesus, this one's even got an infotainment system that works, and that's a massive step forward. It's basically bang into Golf R territory now in so many ways. Meanwhile, what's happened to the Golf? Well, it's got a crappy infotainment system, but on the plus side, it can also do this.
The thing is, the origins of these two cars started at completely different ends of the hot hatch spectrum. You've got the Golf with its mild manners and grown-up image, whereas there's the extreme Type R with its nutter high-revving engines. But it feels like their lines of development are slowly intersecting. So the question is, have Honda and Volkswagen crossed streams? Even their prices are now nearly on par. Now, I know everyone's been moaning about the price of the Type R. It is expensive. It's the most expensive Type R there's ever been at £47,000. But don't forget, that over there is a Golf R 20 years edition, £48,000. And even if you get the standard Golf R and add a few bits and pieces like adaptive dampers to match the spec of this, you're still talking £45,000, which makes this less expensive than you might think. The sad truth is, everything's become more expensive these days, not just the Type R, and that includes this. But this is the best Golf R there's ever been, in my opinion. And why is that? Because it takes all the usability of the Mark 7 and adds a welcome dose of dynamism into the mix. There's so much I like about this car now. For example, the brakes. I love the fact that the pedal is really strong and dependable, so you can really lean on the brakes. And then there's the steering. Now, VW gets a bad rap about its steering. Everyone always criticises it almost by default for producing anodyne cars. But when VW gets its steering right, it does a pretty good job. And this one falls into that category. There's a good sense of connection around a straight ahead. It's nicely weighted as long as you stick it in comfort mode and don't run it in sport, which is way too heavy. And also, just when you're getting into the corners, leaning on the front end and the front wheel starts scrubbing, you can just sense that scrub coming up through the column and giving you the impression of the grip that's underneath you, which is really obviously crucial in a car like this. And when you get into a corner and the front end just starts to scrub, you get those messages coming up through the steering column. And what it means is you can really start banging this thing into corners and trust it. Now, because this is the 20 years edition, you get the adaptive damping as standard, the DCC suspension. But you can also add that to your standard Golf R if you want to. And what it gives you is that breadth of ability that the Golf R is so well known for. On the motorway, you can have the damper set to comfort, and that gives you that body movement that gives the plushness to the ride. But then you can increase the damping rates on a road like this just to give you that extra body control. And that just means you've got that tightness in the car, so it's not getting disturbed by all the crests and falls in the road. It gives you a nice stable platform to launch from. And I also like the fact that the adaptive damping on this generation of Golf R has the variable settings. It's not just 1, 2 or 3 default settings. You can vary it between multiple extremes between that comfort and the most dynamic setting. And it has the added advantage of four-wheel drive, of course, something that Type R doesn't have. And it means the Type R wouldn't see which way this car went on a wet road or from a standing start. And what that means is, on a series of corners like this, I can just fire it from out that one to that one and then on to the next one with absolutely no problem at all. No drama, it's all just calm and easy to do. And don't forget the engine, that faithful old EA 888 2-litre turbo, which isn't, let's face it, the most evocative engine in the world, but it is effective. In the standard Golf R, it gives you 320 horsepower, but this being the 20 years edition, you get 333 horsepower, so another 13. But in either car, it's still properly quick, like 0 to 60 in this one, 4.6 seconds quick. But it's also so drivable. As long as you got the thing above 2,000 RPM, plant the throttle, boom, off you go. While it's not the most evocative sounding thing, stick it in the racier driving modes and you get a bit more induction roar and a few pops and bangs. And you know what, it sounds all right. It sounds fitting for what a hot hatch should be. A bit of a giggle and entertaining. Now, the one thing about the Golf R is you can't have a manual, which, yeah, it's a bit of a shame because obviously doesn't really compete with the Type R in that sense. But the thing is, it's not a bad DSG box, and that's the important thing. It's responsive, really good on the downshifts, really good on the upshifts, smart and quick through the changes, and the fact that you can stick it in auto and mooch along on congested commutes, let's face it, that is another string to the car's bow. But what makes this the best Golf R for me is the fact that you can shift all that torque rearwards, use the clutch packs at the back of the car, and just get the thing to be more playful. Sure, the Mark 7 Golf R had all the everyday usability, but you know, for me, it was just a bit dull, a bit lifeless, a bit point and squirt. This car is not like that. What I'm saying is, the Golf R has moved ever further to the Type R. It's become fun. But as fun as the Golf R is, and it is fun, this thing is on a different level. This thing is like an attack dog with a rocket up its bum. It is just angry and fizzing all the time. Everything about it, the steering, I just love the way the Golf R steering, as I said, is good. It's a good steering setup. This thing is just full of feel and energy. You can just feel all the road surface percolating up through the column. It's wonderful. It just connects you to the road. Of course, the Type R doesn't have the Golf R's four-wheel drive system, but to help it compete on traction, this FL5's got wider tyres than the Mk8 that came before it. But what's really helping it to compete with the Golf R in terms of traction is that diff, the magic front diff that just creates stuff out of nothing. It seems to just allow the front tyres to gnaw away at the tarmac relentlessly. Whoa, there we go, bit of oversteer on the way into that corner, and it just seems to constantly magic up traction where you would think there is none, especially with an engine with this much power running through two front wheels. The only thing is, you do have to watch it. It's so tightly wound that if you get on the power, the minute you break traction and you're in a bend and you've got some steering angle in, it will just find the outside. It will just shoot to the outside of a corner. So you have to be on your toes, but that's the kind of thing that I like about the Type R, that it's not just this slightly boring hot hatchback that's all a bit fluffy around the edges. It really keeps you thinking all the time. You have to be really thinking about how to drive it, but it's also not spiky or stupid in a kind of dangerous way. It's just entertaining, and it kind of makes you concentrate on the experience. One thing that doesn't make you think is the gearbox, because it's so sweet that you're not really even thinking about changing gear at all. The thing is almost like it's, I don't know, the lever's like it's sucking itself into the next gear rather than you having to really connect with them. But it's still mechanical, it's still pure, it's still got a lovely feel to it. I genuinely think the Type R has the best gearbox, the best manual gearbox of any car in production right now. Full stop. That includes Porsches, GT3s, all sorts of things. This thing is absolutely perfect. And then there's the brakes. The brakes are flipping awesome. You just, on the pedal, there's so much bite to the pedal that every time you come into a corner, you just know exactly where you are with the brakes. You can just feed them in and out exactly, just modulate those last little tiny little bits just to get the last bit of speed out the car. And that's the whole thing about this thing. Everything is set up to be so geared towards that last few tenths of lap time, but it's also still incredibly pleasurable on a road. Now, speaking of lap times, I was driving this car at the UK launch at Thruxton, and it was absolutely hammering down with rain. And although this car doesn't have the Golf R's driven rear axle, it's still very lively at the back end, as I found out that day, because coming into the slow speed stuff, trail braking, it was just really oversteering. I mean, you want a bit of rotation in the car, but this thing was properly going sideways. But what's so good about the Type R, what makes it feel like a little racing car, is the fact you can just make little setup changes and it transforms things. For example, on that day, just backing off the damping to give you a little bit more freedom, a bit more roll in the chassis, just took away that extreme oversteer and ended up with a car that was just rotating nicely. And that's what the Type R does. It just rotates beautifully into corners. And you can really be so precise with it because it's so responsive. it's up to you how much weight to play putting on the front or the back using the brake pedal or the throttle, and it responds to all those little inputs that you make, and you know that each time you can just keep chipping away at your lap times. Now, while this car is always going to struggle off the line against something like the Golf R with its four-wheel drive, the thing is, the engine is so powerful, such a match for the Golf R, even that 20 years edition with the extra horsepower. This one's got 326 horsepower, so once you're up and running, if anything, it's going to be faster than the Golf R because it's got so much mid-range torque, but then also that high energy top end with the VTEC. But they've also done a lot of work with this car over the last one just to make the throttle response and the pickup quicker. So I believe there's been a bit of work on the turbos to make them respond faster. And it is just whether, look, if it's any faster than the last one, I don't know, driving this one so far away from the last time I drove an Mk8. But I can tell you that when you put your foot down, it responds quickly, it's up on its toes, and it's motoring forward at ridiculous levels of pace. And another thing, just to take you back to the steering for a moment, I've got to talk about the front end, the way it turns in. Part of that will be the diff, but also it's just almost kind of, I know this sounds a bit of a cliche now, but it's GT3-like in the way it just fires into corners. It is just such a pure thing. Honestly, it's on a different level. I mean, Yaris GRs, everything. This thing is on a different level, not just to the Golf R, but everything else in the hot hatchback market. But what Honda have achieved with this car is beyond even that, because they've managed to make this sort of 911 GT3 style hot hatchback have all the ingredients of the family car it's based on. The ride really is comfortable. If anything, it's probably more comfortable than the Golf. It's a bit more absorbent. Still has a firm edge, but it's not, well, it's in no way sharp at any point over anything. It's not particularly noisy on the motorway. There's very little road noise and wind noise. Then there's the seats. They might look extreme, but they're extremely comfortable. Really figure hugging, so you've got way more side support than the Golf in corners, but when you're just relaxing like this, they've got all the support for long distance comfort as well. And then there's the interior. Not only have we got an infotainment system that works now, but this really is a massive step on from the old car, and to be honest, looking around, it's a better interior than the Golf. That shock horror is the truth of it. All the little joysticks for the heater vents work nicely. The little knurled knobs for the heater controls down here have a nice slickness to them. It's a properly built thing. It just doesn't seem to have any disadvantages.
So the upshot is these two have got closer. The Type R in terms of comfort and the Golf R in terms of fun. And after driving these two today, I stand by my assessment that this is the best Golf R ever to drive. But the fact of the matter is the Type R's metamorphosis is more complete. It is now at least a match for the Golf R as an everyday proposition, and in many ways it's even better, certainly in terms of practicality and usability. But that's not been at the expense of driving dynamics, not in the least, because in that regard, this is the best Type R there's ever been too. But you know that phrase, you can't have your cake and eat it? Well, just for once, it turns out to be wrong. You can with the Type R, because it's the perfect hot hatch to drive on the road, the track, and also the perfect road car to live with. And can you put a price on perfection? Well, yes, as it turns out, you can. It's £47,000, which arguably doesn't seem that much after all. If you've enjoyed this twin test, how about giving it a like? And why not subscribe to the PistonHeads channel, because then you'll get loads more videos just like it.